I love a good sales conversation, especially when it's with an expert and someone who is amazing at it. And that is David Neagle. If you want to check out this week's episode, you're going to learn a lot of amazing things. David shares his process, how it starts with an active listening and asking questions of your potential client. What's great about what he shares is that you're looking for not only do you want to work with this person, but also any potential red flags. Because if you've ever been in sales, you know it's hard in the beginning. You're like, I just need someone with a pulse and a credit card. But he shares with us why that is not always the best way to go about sales. So make sure you tune in to get all the tips and tricks that he shares with us. David Neagle is a renowned entrepreneur, author, and success coach with over 30 years of experience helping individuals and business owners achieve their goals. He started his career as a high school dropout, struggling to make ends meet as a forklift driver. However, he refused to let his circumstances define him and began studying personal development and success strategies. Through his dedication and hard work, David has built several successful businesses, including a multi-million-dollar coaching and training company. He's also the author of several books, including The Millions Within, How to Manifest Exactly What You Want and Have an Epic Life, which has become a must-read for anyone looking to achieve success in their personal and professional lives. David is known for his straightforward and no-nonsense approach to coaching, helping his clients overcome their limiting beliefs and achieving their full potential. He's been featured in numerous media outlets, including Forbes and Entrepreneur. Please welcome David to the show. How are you?
I'm great. How you doing?
Good. I am excited to talk to you about a thing that I love to talk about as well as you do, which is sales. So let's jump into it. Tell me a little bit about your experience and yourself when it comes to sales.
Well, sales is an interesting topic for me because it wasn't until I actually started working in my own business that I realized how far back I started selling. So it goes all the way back to like a lemonade stand when I was a kid, right? But I didn't really learn that I was learning sales probably till I got to, in 1988, I worked for Metropolitan Life for a couple of years, selling life insurance. And then I had a detour from that. I was on the forklift for a while, but I worked for a petroleum company. And part of my growth in that company was I had to spend a year doing sales for that company to be into upper management. So I sold petroleum products for that period of time. But I really started learning the most that I learned about sales when I started my own business. And it was, incidentally, this is kind of a weird thing. From the period of time that I worked for this petroleum company till I started my own business, which was about 7 years. During that period of time, I went through this weird phase where I was very comfortable talking to people that I knew, or if I was working for someone. But if I was to just meet you on the street, I would have a hard time talking with you. So when I started to sell, I realized that I was freezing. When I would go to have a conversation with somebody, I would freeze. And I thought, I don't know what this is about, but I've got to figure out a way to change this. So the first thing that I did was I started going everywhere I went during the day, right? If I went into a gas station or a restaurant or wherever I went, I taught myself how to have an extended conversation with somebody that I never met before right on the spot. And I just kept practicing that, right? So I got really good at asking questions, which then led into me becoming very good at sales a little bit later on.
I love that. And when you think about it, I shouldn't say easy because it's not easy, but what a good way to practice is having those extended conversations. And you don't really think about it, but having a conversation with somebody at Starbucks or at the grocery store, that really takes the pressure rather than being at work.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are some questions that you used to ask in that process?
So the idea was, okay, how can I like if you walk into a gas station, you're at Starbucks, whatever, you might say, hi, good morning, how are you? Something like that, but it's general and it ends that way. You get a couple word answer, it generally ends. So I thought, how could I get to actually know somebody about this person in just a few minutes? So I would ask questions like Starbucks wasn't even around then when I was doing this, right? So this is like going into gas stations to get a coffee. I would say, how long have you been working here? And then they would tell me, and I would say, is this a side thing for you, or is this a dream? Why? Tell me why you work here. And I would just try to make it fun and light. And I kept trying to learn as I would go. So I would ask these opening questions that would get them talking. And then I realized in order to keep them talking, I had to keep asking questions. But if I did it in a way that was kind of fun and not too assertive, they would usually always participate. And they really did. I mean, and then I would challenge myself, find somebody that's hard, like somebody that, they look like they don't want to be spoken to all day, and see if you can crack them, if you could get them to actually participate in the conversation. So it was usually something related to what they were doing. Hi, how are you? Why are you working here? What are you doing? Do you like this? Do you not like this? Is this a second job? Is this a first job? That kind of thing. And then I would just take it from there based on how they answered the question.
How did you create that discipline and honestly stay disciplined to do that every single time as you were trying to push yourself?
Well, I had a dream, and the dream was to start my company. And I knew that, number one. So when I started my business, I didn't know anything about running a business. I mean, I ran a business that was in the petroleum industry, but none of that even really crossed over, except for some leadership skills, into what I was doing today. And I knew that, number one, in order for me to be able to make it, I had to be able to bring an income in consistently every month. As a matter of fact, I had an agreement with my wife that at the time, our bills were $5,000 a month. And the agreement was, if I can't bring in $5,000 a month every month, then I would go back to work for somebody else. Because I was married, we had 4 kids, we had a mortgage, cars, the whole deal. No sense in putting everybody else through hell just because I have a dream, right? And I thought it made a lot of sense, right? If you can't at least make an income doing this, what's the purpose? Like, why else would you be doing this? I'm like, okay. So I said, what is the number one thing I have to master in order to be able to get that part disciplined? So it's 5,000 every single month, and it was sales. I had to be a rock star at sales right from day one, walking in the door of the business. So how I got myself disciplined to do that was that there was nothing. I was absolutely not going to fail. It was not in my DNA, not going to happen. So I was absolutely going to learn how to learn this skill set and learn it really, really well.
You know what? I love that attitude of just like, failure's not an option. We're going for it because I want to be able to do this. I want to be able to support my family. And I know that a lot of business owners, if they struggle with sales themselves, they're like, I think we're going to just hire somebody to do that. But don't you think it's important for small business owners to know how to do those sales themselves, even if they're eventually going to hire a team or maybe hire a team right out of the gate?
Yes, I do. I think it's the most important thing, to be honest with you. I also had that little bit of an idea in my mind, like maybe I should just hire somebody to do this. And I had a mentor at the time, and I asked him this question. I said, can I just hire somebody to do it? And he said, why don't you want to do sales? And I was like, I don't know. I just want to do the teaching and the coaching, and he said, no, why don't you want to do sales? And I got really uncomfortable. And I said, I don't know. I said, I honestly don't. I don't have an answer for you. And he said, I know why you don't want to do it. I said, okay, tell me. He said, because you think sales is something you do to someone. He said, it's not. It's something you do for them. And when he said that to me, like everything in my mind changed instantly. It was really bizarre. I realized that the sales was no different than the teaching that I was doing to help people better their life and their business. It was helping them make a decision to change some kind of behavior right up in the front of it. And when I got that, I got it. I mean, it was like, that was it. I was on fire at that point. I was absolutely on fire.
I love those light bulb moments. I've had that before too, where somebody says something, I'm like, what? Why didn't I think of that? Like, and it totally like shifts your entire mindset. And you're like, I don't know why it took somebody else telling me that to like move things around.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are some ways that you can encourage small business owners to create that culture of discipline, not only for themselves, but for their teams when it comes to sales?
Well, I've worked with thousands of businesses since 1999. And the number one thing is that you have to be very clear on what you want your outcome to be. the number one thing that people have problems with in business is actually their finances. It's not that we don't have other problems, but if you're flush with cash, if you have the resources, you could deal with these things much easier than if you did have that as an issue. So what we tell people is if you can master that, you can learn every other thing that you need to learn within more comfortable timeframes and agendas in order to be able to move your business forward. You can also afford to make more mistakes, because even if you make a financial mistake, you know how to go out and get the money instantly. It's not an issue. But if money is the problem, then it cripples everything else in the business. It has to slow down until you can figure out either how you're going to make enough sales to get money, or you're going to get financing from your business. And most of the people that we work with bootstrap, right? They start their business bootstrapping. They're not getting big financing like, Elon Musk would for starting a new company.
Absolutely. What are some other common mistakes that you see business owners make when it comes to sales? How are some things that we could, avoid those things?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things that I like to help people understand about sales is that the person that you're selling is not your source of supply. In other words, people have this viewpoint, we've been taught this from kids, that everything that we need in life actually comes from somebody else. So one of the first adjustments they make in their mind is that it doesn't come from somebody else. It comes through them, right? Whatever your spiritual viewpoint in life, this is one of the places where it really makes a big difference. Because if you understand that your source of supply is from the universe or spirit or God or whatever that belief is for you, you understand why it's so important to view sales as how can I actually help somebody else? And I'm not trying to get something from them. I never teach people how to turn a no into a yes. And I know a lot of people that do. I don't. I teach people how to get them very clear on either a yes or a no, and then move on from that standpoint, because that's the best business that you can do. If you got somebody that is 100% bought into your product or service and they want to do business with you and they're totally in their yes, right? It's a match made in heaven, right? It's a win-win on both sides. But if you're trying to consistently figure out a way to finagle somebody to get from a no to a yes, you're just trying to trick them into serving what you want. And that's not good business. That does not work well. Then you end up with people that want refunds, or they're not completely bought into your product or service, or they won't use it correctly. So I don't think that helps anybody at all. And eventually, in the long run, it just gives a person a bad name, right? So obviously, the people that we all want good referrals, right? We want good testimonies for whatever it is that we do. If you treat people like a human being and not something to get something from, you'll get that. Even if it was to go wrong, they'll at least treat you with some kind of respect. So my idea is you walk into any kind of sales situation that you're walking into, your thought should be, how can I help this person? Not how can I sell them from the perspective of getting them to buy whatever it is that I have. And I also think that for your average person, that resonates with the human side of us. Most of us don't want to do bad things to other people, right? I know that there's people out there that do, but most of us don't. We actually want to do really great things with really great people, and that allows us to do it.
I love that. I think that's so important, because if we come from a place of listening and helping, it's a completely different vibe than if you're like, oh, I got to make that commission. Oh, I got to meet that quota, whatever it might be, because you're right. Ultimately, it leads to negative reviews, negative conversations that those people have with their friends. And it's just a downward spiral.
Right.
And I have questions for you too, because you're so disciplined when it comes to your business and following up with people. What are some strategies that we as small business owners could use when we're following up with leads, we're following up with prospects? We want to make sure that we stay with people until they've made that decision of whether it's a yes or a no, but we also don't want to be pesky. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So this is an interesting question, because depending on what kind of business that you have, you might deal with this a little bit differently. When I first started out, the first 7 years that I was in business, because I did all the sales myself for my first 7 years. And the thing that I learned that I thought was the most beneficial was that if I was having a conversation with you and we were going to walk away from that conversation, so-called thinking about it, or we had to research or get more information, that I would not leave that conversation without setting up the next appointment. So that was critical, because otherwise you're chasing a person, right? And I'm not into chasing people. People don't want to be chased. So if you say to me, David, I need to think about this, or I need to check with my spouse, or I want to do some research, or I got to see if I can get the financing for this. Okay, great. That's fine. I'll support you in that any way that you can. Let's set a time to talk, at least if we're following up or when you get that done. And we set it before we leave this phone call or however it is that we're actually communicating. So that solves a lot of that problem right off the bat. It's a rule that we all follow in my company. You do not leave a conversation without setting up the next call until whatever it is completed, so that there's no craziness involved. There's no drama. If a person doesn't want to do that, if a person doesn't show up for the call, you can pretty much assume this is not somebody you want to do business with, because they're not being their word. So I don't know why you would want to do something with somebody. I will give somebody the benefit of the doubt if they miss a call like once or something, and if they will answer communication to reset it promptly without putting you off forever or ignoring you, I'm totally down with that. But the moment they start not responding, I don't want to do business with them, and we just move on to the next person.
I love that. I think that is one thing that we as salespeople sometimes do, is we get kind of like tunnel vision on that person when we're just like, we need to let them go. We need to move on, move to the next person that we can help. And like you said, let them go. But I love the fact about getting them on the next call, getting that on the calendar, even if they need to reschedule it. You're so right. It's so much easier while you're already talking to them to just get that on the books. What are some other important skills that you feel salespeople need to be successful in closing sales consistently?
So I have a 4-step process that anybody can put into their sales system. The first thing to remember is this: don't go into any sales conversation telling them anything. All you want to do is ask questions. And the reason for this is it's primarily psychological. Number one, if a person's going to agree to have a sales conversation with you, they must have some kind of a problem that they're interested in, at least hearing what you have to say about it, right? So that's a given right up front. The only exception to that is if you're making cold calls. Then it's a little bit different. But otherwise, if you're following any kind of a marketing system, or you're speaking to sell, or you're finding a way to get leads, whatever way you're doing it, they're responding to something. So when I get on a phone call with somebody, the first thing that I do is remind them how we got to that appointment. I think it's very important, because you don't know what that other person was doing before they got on the call with you, right? And it's the same way if you're DMing or you're texting or whatever. We may have an appointment at 2:00 to talk at 2:00, but I don't know what you were doing before that. I don't know if you're in the right mindset. I don't know if you're worried about your kids. I don't know if your dog just ran out the front door. I don't know any of this. And I don't want to get into a conversation that has nothing to do with sales. So I'll get on the call with the person, and I'll say, hey, it's great to talk to you. If you remember, the reason that we set up this call was because we met at this luncheon or this round table, or we were networking, or you answered an ad or whatever. However you got to the call, remind them of that, because it will take them back to that emotion where it had meaning for them, right? So you're triggering the mind, and now you can move forward with the conversation. I would say my first question that I really want to ask you is, what do you want, right? So you may tailor that differently depending on what you're selling, but basically that's the question. What do you want? And you stay with them until you get very clear on exactly what it is that they want. And people would often ask me, well, how do you know that they're clear? And usually is that the answer is detailed, the answer is emotional, the answer has consequence. Any of those three things, you can tell that a person's actually, they're tapped into the reason that they want something. The second question is, if your business solves a problem, ask them, why do they think that they're currently experiencing the problem that they have? And the reason that you ask this question is because if it is required that you're selling something that a person has to use to solve their problem, you want to make sure that you're working with somebody that doesn't view the world through victim mindset. In other words, if they say to you, well, the reason I got this problem is because my husband did this, or my friend did this, or I was screwed when I was in school, or whatever, you know that they see the world through a place of no personal responsibility. Now, you got to make a decision if you want to work with somebody like that, but people like that can be very difficult to work with. If they say, David, I don't know what it is, really, but I know that it's me that's causing this problem, or they have some sense of personal responsibility, then you understand something very powerful about that person, right? They understand what they want, and they understand that basically there's something that they're doing or not understanding to have the result they currently have. The third question is, tell me what happens if you don't buy this, use this, solve this problem, whatever. It's a consequence question, right? I want to know, if you don't do this, what's the consequence of not doing that? Now, the opposite way that you can ask that question is, what is the benefit if you do this, right? So you kind of have to tell from the person, what are they going to respond to the most? Or if they're unable to answer one, ask it a different way. Because what they're telling you is that they're forward thinking based on your product or service, and they understand the usefulness of whatever it is in some way. And the fourth question is, how serious are you about buying this product? Some way of asking that question, because that is, they understand the urgency. They're in the urgency right now, and they're ready to move into what we would call the closing of the sale. And then from that point on, you can move right into getting a deposit, a credit card, filling out an application, or a guarantee, whatever it is that you do from that point. And of course, you can move those questions a little bit. You can massage them a little bit based on whatever the terminology is that you need to work with in your own business. But those are the 4 questions. And I figured those things out on my own by asking one basic question when I was learning sales. And that was this. I would do a sales call. And then if it went bad, I would write down where it went bad in the call. And I would say to myself, how do I want them to respond? Here's how they responded. How do I want them to respond? And I started thinking, how do I get that response? And I realized it's never by telling them anything. It's almost always by asking a question. So what question would elicit that response? And of course, it started off really big, and then I started chunking it down and being more specific to 4 basic questions that would allow you to just move through any sale relatively easy. Now, of course, if you have to do demonstrations, if they have to study, if they have to find out other information, all of that, you take all of that into consideration. But those are the 4 basic questions to making any sale with any product or service.
I love that your process is asking those questions and also really listening to what people say, rather than a lot of salespeople always have their response ready, and it shows that they're not listening to the client, but that yours is, no, we're focused on asking those questions, pausing, listening to make sure that we're really hearing what those prospects really need.
Yeah. That's the biggest skill set for a salesperson, is to learn how to actually listen. I tell people, make no noise whatsoever, no sniffing, no coughing, no, when you're listening, when you're talking to somebody, you go, no, nothing. Be totally silent while they're talking. Say nothing. Get very comfortable being quiet on those calls, because people will tell you everything that you need to know for you to determine whether you actually want to work with them or not, which I really think is the big thing about a salesperson. It's not just all about whether they say yes or no. It should also be about whether you want to make the sale with this person or you don't. It goes both ways.
Well, and keeping an ear out for those potential red flags, like you mentioned, of hey, this person and I are not going to vibe together. Or like you mentioned, the victim mindset of we don't want to work with people like that because they've got other problems that we cannot solve.
Yeah. Don't want crazy clients, don't want dramatic clients, don't want non-paying clients, and I know that when a person's in the beginning of their business, you're thinking to yourself, all I need is a pulse and a credit card, right? I understand that. But if you're really going to build long-term and you really want the results where you're actually enjoying what you're doing every day, you've got to learn how to see those flags, as you said, and rule them out so that you're really building something solid for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you have carved out some time with us today, which I so appreciate, but we could talk for hours. So where can people connect with you? Because you have such a vast library of knowledge and so many things that you share all over the internet. Where's the best place for people to connect with you?
So if they want to hear more about what we do, they could go and listen to us for absolute free at the Successful Mind podcast, right? So we've been doing that podcast since 2017, and recently Steph Tuss, my CEO, is doing it with me. We're doing a lot of training on there together. And then you can go to lifeisnowinc.com. That's our website.
The podcast is a definite must watch because I love you and Steph going back and forth and that banter that you have. It just feels like we're like a fly on the wall to listen to the two of you and your brilliant minds talk about all this sales knowledge that you have, combining that together and sharing with us. It's amazing. So I'll be sure to link that in the show notes for everybody to make sure that they check it out. Thank you again for spending time with us today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.